No, Ryan. What's up, brother?
Mr. Ryan, thank you again for having me. What is this, number three?
This is number three for us. Number three. I wanted you as the first three-time guest, but we had to reschedule. But we're here now.
Who
I think
who beat me? Who beat me?
Zaid.
Oh my God.
I know.
All right, well, that's true.
Hey,
To be fair, we did have one in the books, and then I didn't go to Miami, which
man.
is
It's all good.
justifiable. I'm over Miami. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's awesome. I actually just ripped a pod with Nolan in person, and that was my first in-person podcast. Incredible. Such a good time.
Such a different feel to it when you're doing it in person.
Yeah, really. I mean, better flow, better cohesion. I enjoy that. So I kind of want to start
Absolutely.
prioritizing in-person podcasts. I want to prioritize speaking as well. I've been doing a lot of things recently, and when you start doing a bunch of stuff and you start spending a lot of time with other people, your desires and objectives start to mimic theirs. Compared to me when I was living by myself in the jungle, I noticed that I've been focusing on things that really don't scratch my itch. And one of the few things that scratches my itch is talking about ideas and putting them on the internet.
Let's talk about that. I'm curious about the verbal fluency stuff because it's I mean, we've had this is our third conversation on a podcast, but between Twitter Spaces and phone calls and stuff, we've had many conversations. And one thing that sticks out to me always is your ability to articulate things, um, both in the sense of making hard ideas seem simple, but just in being like an entertainer as well. There's a certain flow and something that makes you listen a little deeper when you talk. What have you learned about when it comes to verbal fluency and practicing that skill? Because I know it's something that you put some work into.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I think first and foremost, there's so many factors here. I'm a conversational thinker, right? So I understand and comprehend the world via conversations. And I actually figured this out because I was in Peru, I was in the Amazon, and I was in an ayahuasca ceremony, and we can get into psychedelics. I'm not a huge psychedelic proponent, but I was sitting there having like the most ridiculous kind of interdimensional experience. And as I
Mhm.
was doing that, as I had lost all of my faculties that made me me, I was still comprehending that entire situation via a conversation. So when I go
Mhm.
down, like when I lay my head down at night and I'm just letting my ideas run rampant, those ideas are having themselves in the form of a conversation, as if I was speaking with you like this in a podcast. So I think that's fact number one. I believe that there's a lot of people that are conversationalists, but I also believe that you can train your brain to think in conversations. So one of my friends, as we've been talking about being more articulate and the importance of being a good communicator and conversationalist, and how, in my opinion, that is the primary differentiator between someone who's good and someone who's great. He started just having conversations with himself on the way to the gym every day. So
Mhm.
45 minutes every single day of having conversations. And he comes to me 3 days later. He's like, dude, I want to speak more. I get excited from speaking. That growth curve, like right, that positive feedback loop has started, and I'm starting to think in the idea of conversations. So I
Mhm.
think that's a factor. It's teaching your brain to think in conversations. Two, it's approaching it from a growth mindset. Most people will go and have a conversation and perform poorly, and that'll reaffirm their identity and their decision that, hey, I'm not meant to be a conversationalist. I'm going to stay in the back. But if you approach that as an opportunity to get better, you never lose. Because I'll go back and I'll listen to this podcast. I'm like, you repeated yourself here. You said, you used a filler word. And that's enough pain and friction for you to make changes the next time. That's factor number two. Factor number three, for me personally, I think that I wasn't really listened to as a kid growing up, as none of us are, right? Like it was hard to get your parents to listen to you because, like, no, you're just a dumb kid, right? So I had to learn that skill. And I also understood that you don't deserve to be listened to, right? You don't deserve to be heard. And I think that's something that has really destroyed this generation is this idea that their opinion matters. No, you have to earn people's ears, right? Because they could listen to anything in the world right now. Why would they want to listen to you? So that all compounded with the fact that I studied and I've worked in marketing for so long. It's all about learning how to get people's attention to enact your will on them for the better, right? So I'm just using the principles of marketing to teach people how to live better, and that's really what I think about. It's a utility factor.
Yeah, it's a really interesting art, and so when you were talking about your friend going to the gym every day and having that conversation with himself in the car, was that something that he was recording, or was that simply just talking out loud?
Just talking out loud, right? You literally just want to talk to yourself. Talk to yourself, you journal. They always say that paper is more patient than people, but I
Mm.
talk to myself all the time. I have roommates now, and they're like, dude, It's like 7 in the morning and you're in the kitchen just talking to yourself. But that's how you do
Mhm.
it. That's how you get better. Because, if you're shitty at speaking, no one's going to want to listen to you. So talk to yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things where, um, like it has it's like the 80-20. One of the things in life that's like an 80-20, where the return is, if you're able to speak and you're like a very charismatic speaker, that skill right there will get you so far. There's so much that you could do, and so much persuasion that you could have by simply just putting some time and effort into it. And it's one of those things that, since like no one does, it's such like it. Just a little bit of practice goes such a long way, because no one is doing it.
Yeah, it's an amplifier, right? An engineer that's in the 90th percentile but speaks well and has some sort of social acuity will near unanimously outperform the guy in the 99th percentile with way less work. So it's an easy way to amplify anything else that you're doing. I'm by no means the most knowledgeable person in the health space. To be honest, I'm far from it. But what I am good at is being able to like understand things and speak about them in a way that resonate with the average person. So I think it's communication plus empathy, being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and being able to meet them where they're at. Now, something else that you mentioned here is how it's so applicable to every pursuit. Now, this is part of a greater idea, which are meta skills. And this is something that, I focused on since I was really young, and I think everyone should focus on, are skills that will benefit them no matter what their next move is. Because I've always had kind of commitment issues. It's like, I know that I'm not going to be the person I am now in 5 years. So why would I make a huge investment and take a huge risk on committing to something when my opinions and objectives are 100% going to change? So going to school, everyone was getting finance degrees, they were getting data analytics degrees, they were getting accounting degrees, because that was surefire, secure way to make money. But I was like, listen, if I'm going to go and I'm going to get a law degree, and like the lawyer as a career is not even going to be a thing in 10 to 15 years, it's going to be like an AI moderator that's going to take the place of most attorneys. Like, that's ridiculous. What if I just focus on meta skills that are going to help me wherever? That's what I
Mm.
did. In the short term, people are afraid of it because I didn't have a tangible skill set. Like when I was in college, everyone else was like, yeah, I'm going to get a fucking computer science degree and I'm going to get a 6-figure job. But I was playing the long run, and I'm so grateful I did, because that enabled me to have doors always open to me to go and pursue so many
Mhm.
other things just based on my natural proclivities.
So, what do you think those meta skills are outside of speaking?
Anything that's interhuman, like
Mm.
interhumans first and foremost, right?
Got you.
So can you have charisma, right? Are you good at negotiation? Are you good at sales? Are you good at speaking and communication? Public speaking is incredibly important. Marketing, no matter what you're going to do, you're going to have to market it. You're going to have to make it look enticing. I know so many guys that are so good at what they do, but they have no marketing fundamentals, and they're shooting themselves in the foot, right? So those are some factors there. Learning how to lead teams and learning how to build teams and also lead people and motivate people. Studying leadership is incredibly important, right?
Mhm.
Learning how to get people rallied behind a cause. Another one is operations, right? It's operations and strategy. That's so important. And I really focused on that, especially in my first like professional endeavor. It's like I need to get good at learning how to connect all the dots. And me, as someone who's not naturally an operator, I became a really good operator through that. But it's so helpful now because anytime I want to spin something up new, I know how to create those structures and I know how to create those systems in a fraction of the time and a fraction of the effort.
And so we touched on marketing a few times in this conversation, and it's something that, like when I first started following you on Twitter, you see you as a health guy, and obviously that's what your content is all about. But in speaking with you and in listening to you speak, a lot of what you talk about comes down to marketing and persuasion. And that
Yeah.
whole world is not one that you tend to talk about too much, but it's one that is apparent, just uh, how much it's rubbed off on you and rubbed off on your work. What type of things should people be aware of when it comes to marketing themselves, and if they want to run a personal brand, run a business, these type of things that are going to be like on your own type of stuff? What type of role do you think marketing plays, and what are the key things to be thinking about there?
Yeah. So marketing is just the most tangible application of human psychology, right? For me, it was a justification to spend a lot of time figuring out how people think and understanding consumer behavior. And listen, we're being marketed to 24/7. Right now, you've got that drink on the table with perfect product placement, right? You're wearing a hat. We are constantly being pulled left and right, every which way. Our attention is always being, vied for. So it's really important to understand the fundamentals of marketing so you don't fall trap to it. But also understand that it's a beautiful art, understand that it can be used for good. At the end of the day, it's just figuring out how to make people spend their resources on you and not on other people. When I say
Mhm.
resources, I'm not just talking money, I'm talking time, right? Like, why is someone going to listen to an hour-long podcast of us when they could spend, an hour on TikTok watching dancing videos and beheadings? So it's really an interesting concept. In terms of like your original question was how can people apply marketing, or I'm sorry, I missed your question. I got distracted.
Yeah, just like applying marketing or leveraging marketing for either like their personal brand, business, or whatever it really may be. Um, I guess it would be going back to the human psychology thing and really dialing in on psychology.
Yeah, in the fundamentals of attention. So I think it's good, and whenever I approach any new topic, I look for flagship leaders in that space that I can kind of just obsess over for a little bit, and that's a great way to do it. Like obsess either like a specific segment or an individual. For me, some of the guys that really opened my eyes back when I was in college was Seth Godin. Seth
Mm.
Godin is just an incredible brand marketer, visionary, and he does such a good job at kind of explaining the concepts and fundamentals of why we do the things that we do and why we're attracted to the things we're attracted to and how to grow a movement, right? Because that at the end of the day, that's what marketing's for. It's about growing a movement. It's not about making sales. I don't really care about media buying. I never got into any of that stuff. It's all about just getting attention. So Seth Godin was great. Rory Sutherland was incredible
Mm.
as well. He's the chairman of Ogilvy, and he kind of understands and tells you about the non-tangibles behind marketing, right? And it's just so fascinating to me. I think it's really just about exploring it with a creative and open mind and then learning how to apply it to your own and being an observer. I think that's the most important thing is being an observer. Every time you look at something and it grabs your attention, ask yourself, like, why did this grab my attention? Why
Mhm.
was this YouTube video out of all the thumbnails the one that I wanted to watch? Why, as I'm scrolling through this TikTok, is this the one that grabbed my attention? You always want to be looking for those pattern interrupts that work on you and then reverse engineer it immediately. So for
Mhm.
me, it's like I have these massive swipe folders of organic content and paid media that every single time one catches my attention, I habitually go and I put it into this Notion document. And then I reverse engineer the formula as to why I think this worked, right? What was the hook? What was the tagline? What was the visual? And just doing that, it trains you to understand why things are grabbing my attention. It also makes you immune to most marketing and, makes you respect the art of it. And the reason that I don't talk about it is because most of my content's around health stuff. With my Twitter account, it was never meant to be like a marketing play. It was meant to be, I want to share these ideas that I have in my head because it makes me feel good.
And what's an interesting part of that attention equation. One is the sense of awareness that you need to have within yourself to start to realize these things. And it's like, it's almost more than just like an eye for knowing what you like, or it becomes more than just knowing what you like because that particular sense of awareness, it tends to be this thing that you almost, um, it's deeper because you think about like why you like this thing, and that's a whole nother rabbit hole within itself, that just brings on this like better sense of understanding within you. So it's just a super interesting thing when you start to break that down, um, and like why this marketing is working on me. And it goes back to just learning a lot about yourself through that process of just training that sense of awareness.
It's so true. It's funny. It's like a workaround way to understand your true core values. Like what really drives me, right? When I buy a gold chain, do I buy it because I like the material? Do I buy it because I like the design? Or is it saying something about my identity? And the reason that
Hmm.
we buy most things is because they reaffirm our identity. I drive a car because I want people to perceive me as driving that car. And it says something about me. Like I drive a doorless Jeep instead of a BMW because it says something about
And
me, right?
it's
So that
fun.
really is the reality. A lot of time, and this is why I typically avoid brands in general. Like I don't like wearing brands, is because people buy brands to borrow credibility from that brand, right? And I noticed this when I was in one of my classes and I saw this guy, this really quiet guy. He was a great kid, but he was incredibly quiet and he didn't really have a strong sense of self, right? He didn't have that identity laid out for him, but he was covered in brands. right? He had this hoodie that was some artist, I think, like with an artist brand identity. He had like, I forget what brand hat it was. And then he had all these stickers on his laptop because he wanted people to take the identity and take the credibility of those brands and apply them to him as well. And
Hmm.
it's a tale as old as time. That's why every single online guru wears Rolexes and they drive a Lambo, because they're borrowing credibility from those objects.
No doubt about it. And in that attention equation, the other side of that is fascinating as well because we're in this attention economy where um, our attention spans are diminishing with TikTok and just the way the world is currently. And it's hard for people to even think long enough and think hard enough to start to figure out some of these things for themselves. Um, and getting focused and getting in that sense of deep work or even just pondering things deeply is a lost art, and it's something that I know you have spent a good amount of time thinking about. What do you think the biggest movers are when it comes to um, gaining that attention back?
Yeah. First, understanding that it's been stolen from you, right? And then breaking down and understanding fundamentally how it's being taken from you and why you, being as smart as you are still susceptible to all of these traps.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something I realized when I was building software, because I was trying to figure out how to make our software as addictive as possible, to get people coming back, to minimize churn. And I read this book, Hooked, by Neri Yao, and I figured out all of the secret little ways that they hook you in and they trap you with color psychology and notifications. And I was disgusted. I immediately deleted all social media and I stopped playing video games. But now that I'm back on social media, I still get trapped. Like me,
Mm-hmm.
as someone who knows all of this, it still is just such a problem for me. It's the biggest problem that I face is I black out and I wake up and I'm on Instagram Reels. So the most important way to stop this addiction is like any addiction. You abstain from it. You remove it from the house. If I'm an alcoholic, I'm not going to be going to a bar. I'm not going to be stocking up my fridge with liquor, right? I'm going to abstain from it. That removes willpower from the equation altogether. So something that I really focus on is not bringing my phone with me, right? When I'm on my computer, I'll typically use apps like Newsfeed Eradicator or Block Site that'll not allow me to access these triggering platforms. Super important. You know, it's so sad too, because I'll go and I'll look back at these old movies or TV shows, and you'll see people just hanging out like in a bar or hanging out at a coffee shop. No phones in sight, and they're just forced to be present. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
so envious of that. So I try to replicate that in my old life. I do a lot of things. You know, we have this Daylight computer now, which is made by the boys at Daylight
How
Co.
are those things?
I've been liking it. I really like it just because it doesn't, like those tools that we were talking about that really distract you, like that stimulate you, right? The colors, the notifications, the flashy lights. It's like the Vegas Strip with all the lights
Mm-hmm.
pointing and getting your attention. They're not compatible here, and I can use them in an environment where otherwise I wouldn't be able to use devices, like
Mm.
outside in the sun. So I think those factors really enable me. It's really reinforced my note taking capacity. It's reinforced my like reading and writing because I can just do it without those distractions. And when you have no other option, your brain will eventually capitulate, right? Because the reason that you go on Instagram instead of reading a book is because it's more stimulating than reading a book. But if
Mm-hmm.
you go out and you do nothing, reading a book is going to be more stimulating than doing nothing. So you just got to break through those thresholds, right? You're going to sit out 20 minutes because you've allowed yourself to become inundated with cheap dopamine. It's going to feel like shit. You're going to be having withdrawals. But you get through those 20 to 30 minutes of withdrawals and you realize that, hey, reading a book is actually quite enjoyable. Sitting here with my thoughts is more interesting than I thought.
Mm. No doubt about it, dude. And you know what's so funny about what you just said is you made the analogy with the alcoholic keeping alcohol in the house. And, you know, it's such a simple analogy and an intuitive one. But in our first conversation, we were having a similar conversation discussing, though, addictive foods and talking about like, if you want to, if you love Oreos and you're trying to lose weight, why the hell do you have Oreos in your house? But just that statement alone, it's something I got like 4 or 5 DMs about. Like, oh, dude, no, Ryan, when he was saying this on your podcast, dude, it really resonated home with me. Blah blah blah, and it's just fascinating how it's such a simple, intuitive thing, but yet evidently it's something that people need reinforced.
Isn't that funny? It's so funny because people have such a hard time objectively viewing their own actions and behaviors. They haven't been able to create the segmentation of mind required to treat yourself like someone that you're responsible for. So that's something that I learned, through business, is because I had to play the operator role and the strategist role. And it's
Hmm.
something that you can cultivate via mindfulness. But we oftentimes are willfully ignorant of our own behaviors because it's too emotional. We're too emotionally attached to objectively assess ourselves. I can't tell you how many consults I do with people that are way smarter than me, both for health and for business. They're way smarter, way more successful than me, but it's blatantly obvious what they need to change. And then I tell them that, and then they still can't get over that hurdle. It's like literally where it's like, yeah, like I'm eating healthy, but we got it. We have snacks for the kids. I'm like, are the snacks healthy? And they're like, no, not really. I'm like, then why do you have them in the house? I'm like, because they're easy. I'm like, why are you feeding your kids something that you wouldn't eat yourself? Like, that's an even deeper question. And then you're
Hmm.
also eating them. So we do all of these workarounds. We do these mental gymnastics to justify our actions and behaviors. But if we can learn the art of detaching ourselves from our own behavior and treating ourselves, essentially giving ourselves split personality disorder in a form of utility, like all of our actions and behaviors come so much more malleable. And I think that's something that I got really, really good at, probably through mindfulness. It really was through mindfulness training, but being able to objectively assess my actions and behaviors and be able to detach myself from the current emotions and reminding myself, hey, listen, I'm in charge here,
Hmm.
right? Like my monkey and reptilian brain, my mammalian and reptilian brain are trying to get me to do this. But at the end of the day, I'm the one in charge and kind of taking the reign on your actions and behaviors.
That is something that you kind of, I guess, learn through time. It's a very rare skill for people to have that awareness and that willpower to do that. But it's something that comes with a lot of maturity. And it's something that before we hit record today, um, you said that you were interested in maturity, and that's been a topic that's been front of mind for you lately. Why do you think that is?
That was the greatest transition ever, by the way. That was awesome.
I'm
How you
trying, bro.
whistled that in there. Yeah. So, listen, I think it's really important to cycle everything. At the end of the day, my objective is to have as many life experiences as possible. I believe that there's like a finite amount of archetypes in this world of people that you could be. And a lot of people stick with one their entire life. I really want to entertain every single one of those. And I've gotten a lot in my short time on this earth. I don't know if it's just because I get bored easily or I just like really quickly adapt, but I've been able to live a lot of really cool lives. And, the life that I've been living the last year and a half or so has been very carefree. And it was really important. It was an incredible way to unlock this new version of myself, and it's yielded incredible results. But now, as I get, I just turned 26, and looking at my long term objectives, those objectives being, having a wife and having kids is probably one of the most important things that anyone could want. I realized that, it's important to be more mature. And this is one of those ideas where it's so new to me and it's so present, like immediate, that I really have a hard time verbalizing it. And
Hmm.
as good as I am at communicating, a lot of the ideas that are most present in my mind I can't even speak articulately about. But I think a lot of people go through their entire lives being immature. Like we have so many man children now. We have so many people that still blame their parents and blame their upbringing for their poor qualities and poor behavioral traits. But when you realize that, you can really change everything about yourself and there's no reason that you can't. And even if that's not true, I think having any other mindset would be not self-serving. It really allows you to kind of objectively look at your life and say, like, based on what I want in the future, what type of person do I need to be to hit those goals and objectives? And based on the life that I want and based on the person that I want to be, I need to start enacting new traits. I need to be more accountable. I need to be more
Mm.
dependable, right? I need to be a man of virtue and kind of look at all these other aspects of life that I've entertained, but I haven't made a priority. So, one thing that I'm trying to do is you probably saw from our text this morning is respond immediately, right? And it also comes down to looking at people that you respect and that you revere and identifying what those quality and traits are and applying those. I think so many people, you know, they pursue something that they don't even like, right? Like you have someone that you don't like, someone that's more successful than you, and you start playing their game. And that's not even the
Hmm.
game that you want to play. It's like they have qualities and traits and behaviors that you don't want, but because you're playing their game, you adopt them. And that's such a horrible way to go about it. So I'm really just kind of looking at the qualities of people that I like and the people that I respect and have a lot of reverence for. And they're always very mature, right? They're
Mm.
mature, they're controlled, they're dependable. And I want to enact those because, I think when we're kids, we look at all adults as being infallible. You probably remember in the neighborhood, you thought all adults had it figured out. They were
Oh
demigods
yeah.
for all intents and purposes. But you hit a certain threshold and you realize that they're just wrinkly kids and they have as many problems as you do, probably more. And I kind of see that. I see how many people are full blown adults that are incredibly successful, but are completely developmental delinquents. And that's a nightmare to me. I want to be a mature adult, and that's kind of my goal. So I'm focusing on maturity as a whole.
It's such an interesting conversation because it's like there's so many aspects of it, because on one hand it's like you look at the stuff that you're doing, your articulation, your knowledge in the health sector, your ability to stay disciplined with your body and your habits, and obviously you're bringing in income and doing these things that we view on the outside as very mature. But then there's that whole other aspect of it, which is accountability, responsibility, being dependable. And it's they're words we hear all the time, but just because they're not common. Um, we kind of, I feel like we kind of assume, especially as kids, like you were saying before, that all adults have these um, habits and have these things down. But it is so rare that you meet an adult that actually takes responsibility, is accountable, is freaking dialed in on so many different aspects. And I've thought about. I'm very interested in cults or things that have a cult following, because like what does that speak on our human nature? Like why do they have this thing? And I thought a lot about that question with Andrew Tate, and I was like, why are people so obsessed with this guy? And the answer I came to was like, for a lot of young kids, he's the only example of someone who's rich, in good shape, and is articulate. And that trio right there is so rare in modern life. Um, and I mean, what do you think the things are for you then now that you're trying to enact upon? Is it simply just trying to stay on top of being responsible, being virtuous, these almost like meta traits that we view as positive qualities, or there's some other more like tactical things that you're trying to enact?
Great question. There's both. And for context, I came from, I was very irresponsible in college until I started, that software company. And then I became very responsible, overly responsible for my years, just too mature, too dialed because I felt like I had to push up.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a bad taste in my mouth from that because I was doing all of that and it started turning me into kind of a sterile person. And I didn't like that. So then I revolted, right? And I went all the way back to the other side. And that's the reality of most behavior change, especially for extremists like myself, is
Mm-hmm.
that, we think of balance as being like right here in the middle constantly. But this is also on a long enough time frame. The pendulum going back and forth is balance, and then eventually it reaches the middle. So that's kind of where it was for me. I already had these traits of responsibility. I already had these traits of high performance. But then I completely disavowed all of them, and I went and I did the total opposite. And I think that's important that everybody go and identify things that they've been doing for a really long time and say, what would the opposite of this be? And can I do that for a while just to see what would become of me, for good or for bad? You never know unless you try. Now, when it comes to, for me personally, I believe that all of us really have one or two things that cause the majority of our problems, but a lot of people never get over it. They go their entire
Mm-hmm.
lives being afflicted by one or two things that if they could somehow fix, their life would be immaculate. For me, it was a tendency to put things off, right? And that comes down to ADHD, just tendency to put things off, to not just go and do things, right? And it really, it affects my self-worth and it affects my perspective and image of myself. So it's really about, all right, hard work isn't working, right? Like working harder isn't the solution here for me. So I need to work smarter. I need to think more about this and come up with new solutions and essentially approach it like any other problem. Here's the problem. Can we identify the deepest root core of the problem? Can we come up with a bunch of hypotheses for why this is the way that it is? And then can we start just doing experiments and gathering data and see what works and what doesn't until we get close enough to figuring it out? So how does that look like for me personally? First and foremost, I just take on more responsibility. I perform really well when I have so much stuff on my shoulders and I'm forced to perform. Some of us are just performers. And it's so ironic because I just spent the last year and a half with no responsibilities whatsoever. Like literally, quite literally none, which
Mm.
was crazy. But you gotta do the opposite sometimes. So I think that's a factor there, and then that's going to force you to figure out those solutions and strategies and behaviors, right? But I honestly, the biggest one is just like asking yourself, like, what is the thing that I'm not doing, but I know I need to do, and if I did it, it would solve a lot of my problems. And there's always something. So yeah,
No doubt about it. It's an interesting balance too between, because it's one of those things where like you can a lot of these things like you can white knuckle for a bit, and you can like try really hard to be accountable and respond to those texts, and then with time, like the white knuckling, you kind of lose that willpower, um, and then you almost bounce back in the opposite direction to another extreme where you're like, dude, I just want to respond to no texts ever for a long time. So it's an interesting thing there of getting to that point that it's uh, it's balanced.
yeah. Well, willpower is fickle. I only use willpower when I'm trying to enact a new habit.
Mm,
So I'll never really have to use willpower for longer than 2 weeks, just because I'm able to acquire habits pretty quickly. And that's how you need to think about it. It's like, yeah, this sucks, but my entire objection or my entire objective with having something that sucks in my life is that by having it kind of be shitty right now and grinding right now, it'll be less trouble in the future, right?
mm-hmm,
So like when I work really hard knowing that it's a finite time scale because what I'm working hard for is to create something that will then make it easy.
mm-hmm.
And that's with everything. I think also, yeah, it's like dieting too, right? It's like, yeah, you can be
Yeah.
really strict and have the most dialed diet, but it's going to wear off. And then, like you said, you're going to rebound. But if instead you put that hard work into figuring out how to make eating healthy, fun, and enjoyable and just second nature, then you'll never have to work hard again after that. And that's what I've done with diet and fitness. Because everyone's always like, man, you're so dialed and disciplined with fitness and nutrition, but I'm not. I just like figured out a way to make it where I want nothing else. Like I want
Right.
to work out and I want to eat healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something I've come to realize as well. Is like with time, and you kind of find that balance of, I think the analogy you made is so apt. Is like sometimes balance is going from one extreme to the other extreme for a little bit of time, because with that you kind of kiss the fire and walk away whistling. You get to find that balance for you in the middle eventually, um, and it's something that's almost more sustainable because you feel like you've touched both sides of that, so you're able to then with time find that balance for you. And when it comes to the maturity thing, I think a lot of I think the one thing that's really interesting about this is that's not saying that you should lose that like childlike wonder and that childlike fun. And I think it's an important distinction because that childlike fun and wonder, I'm curious your thoughts on this, is one of the things that I think you should try hard to hold on to. Is like kids just have so much more fun than adults. If you could find things to hold on to in that same way, I think it's important for just living that life well lived.
It's essential. And you see it when you see an adult that kind of lost grips on that inner child. And I think that's what it comes down to is conceptualizing it as the inner child that never left, right? That same child that, had some bad experiences and that's why the way that you are. It's about becoming attuned to that and really playing archaeologist with your own life and really visualizing like who was that child? Who was Ryan as a little kid? Like, why is he the way that he is? What did he like? What did he dislike? And nurturing that because if you don't nurture that, you lose it. So for
Mm-hmm.
me, like that inner child comes out when I'm playing games with my friends and when I'm in nature with animals. And I prioritize that almost above all else. Like I can't tell you how incredible I feel when I'm just like with an animal. Like I love animals. And it's so funny because I see it, with my dad too. He worked hard his entire life, very, very mature, like really grinded his ass off. Now he's in the age where he's almost retiring. everything he does is with animals. Like he works at like a nature conservancy center now and volunteers there. And like, that's what brings back out his inner child. And I see it. And I see it in myself as well. So you got to figure out what brings out that inner child, and you got to make sure you nurture it, because if you don't, it's going to go away. And then you're relegated to being a grumpy old man. You're Ebenezer Scrooge at that point. And we see a lot of people like that, especially the successful ones.
No doubt about it, dude. And yeah, that flow state that you get so much as a kid playing sports, and then with time, you lose those things that give you flow. And like for me, the podcast is this thing that really allowed me to have flow. Like I played baseball my whole life, and then ended up quitting in the middle of college. And for a while, I was like, dude, I really miss baseball. But it wasn't until I how wasn't until I started the podcast that I realized I didn't miss baseball at all. I literally just missed having an activity that put me in flow, and it was solely that thing. So I think just finding those things, whether that's like a martial art or a sport, or even just writing or articulation, I think they're just essential to living that life well lived.
They really are. And that's an important distinction that you like people need to make, is because if that was you and you were like, oh, what I really miss is baseball, you'd probably still be like, try to play baseball. But it doesn't scratch that itch anymore, right? You got to dig deeper and you got to extrapolate. What is the reason that I like this thing so much? Like, if I were being like, I want to like bring out my inner child, it's like, well, I'll just play video games all day. But it's not me playing video games as an adult. It's not the same as me playing video games as a 16-year-old. But there were certain factors that I can extrapolate from that activity that I can apply in a way that like actually benefits my life. I see it a lot with college athletes or high school athletes even. Their entire life is predicated on this sport. They think that's who they are. Their identity is football or whatever it is. Then they graduate college. They don't go to the big leagues. And now they have an entire identity crisis. And they weren't able to take those core fundamentals of what drove them to success in that field and apply it elsewhere. They're still chasing the dream. Well, you see the other athletes that took that same drive, that ambition, that camaraderie, and they applied it to entrepreneurship or finance or a family, and they're killing it, they're crushing it. So you got to find that. You got to find those drivers to those behaviors and learn how to apply them in a way that makes sense in your current life.
No doubt about it, dude. And something that I'm I'm happy we got this conversation in today, because I've been thinking a lot about, and I'm having a bit of a fitness crisis. I'm trying to figure out what the hell to do, and I'd love to get your 2 cents on this. So, I've been training very traditional bodybuilder esque for quite a while now, and I love it. I really enjoy lifting heavy and training in the gym. But I watched this video, dude, of Hamza, you know that guy, the YouTuber. It was on Twitter the other day. A video of him sprinting, and he got pretty built up, like very bodybuilder esque, and he looked like a fucking idiot sprinting. And I was like, dude, I'm going in the wrong direction with this. Like, I have to, I gotta keep my athleticism and keep doing things to stay, to keep that athletic bone in me, those fast twitch muscles. Like I have to find these things for me, and find like some fun cardio even. So I've been trying to figure out what to do, and martial arts has been something I've been thinking about. So what's your 2 cents there when it comes to the whole? I guess you would call it finding that training that's fun for you, but also is that thing that has some longevity in it, and is something you can continue doing for a long time and keep you healthy for a long time.
Yeah. It's funny. A lot of people get stuck on the bodybuilding thing because that's their like the younger version of themselves saying that all my solutions will be solved if I had more muscles. Girls would like me, guys would respect me. But you reach a point where you realize that's not the case. A lot of people just never overcome that, right? They're still stuck on that. And I believe unless you're competing for something, it's nonsensical for you to only train that modality for your entire life. All that's going to lead to is burnout, imbalance, and like probably injuries. And
Yep.
most importantly, a suboptimal physical version of yourself. So I really approach and endorse the true hybrid athleticism model. My objective is that I want to have ample muscle mass. I want to be able to move, and I want to be able to compete in any modality that presents itself. I want to look good when I go to the beach and when I'm, on a boat. I want to be able to go to the gym and I want to be able to put up weight like the guys that are lifting. I want to be able to go on the mats and be able to do 5 10 minute round or 5 5 minute rounds. I want to be able to put on the gloves and be able to scrap. I want to be able to go and sprint with some guys. I want to be able to go on long runs. I want to be able to go and do swim. So like your objective is to be as healthy as possible for as long as possible. It's not to be the fastest sprinter in the world. It's not to be the best basketball player at your lifetime rec league. So everyone should really go and pursue and cycle training modalities, because the real hook that I personally get from training is that growth curve, going in and being so much better than I was yesterday. And also realizing and coming to understand your body more, and realizing that training only like on a linear plane, well, like doing like bodybuilding or strength training, is causing you to, it's not solving your problems. And I really realized that I'm really focusing more and getting back into functional training and really moving my body as a whole. And that's okay. Like I'm sacrificing muscle mass for that. I'm sacrificing body composition for that,
Mm-hmm.
but it's so worth it because of the way that I feel and my enjoyment of the activity. So if anyone's bored, or if they're just not on the like training, like they're trying to hard nose their way to being like, I got to go to the gym more. Maybe you need to find a different way of training and expressing your physical traits. So that should
Mm-hmm.
be the objective, is to switch it up, to become curious of new training styles and then go try them out.
No doubt about it, dude. And is there? I know you trained a couple different martial arts at this point. Is there one that you tend to enjoy more than the other ones? And do you think that, if so, do you think that's because of kind of your unique physiology, or is it something to do with like the sport itself?
Well, the beauty of martial arts is there's no perfect body type, right?
Yeah.
For mixed martial arts, because your game is predicated on your unique
Mm-hmm.
physical and cognitive capacity. So when it comes to like what am I best at, I'm best at grappling, right? It's just like how I'm built, how I'm wired, how I think. I'm just really good at grappling, and I always have been, just intuitively. So that makes the most sense for me to focus on, to get really good at. But like I said, I'm not driven by just being really good at something. I'm driven by the new growth and like learning new skills. So I think everyone should do mixed martial arts, right? They should go and they
Mm-hmm.
should train jujitsu for a while. They should go and they should train Muay Thai, maybe Dutch kickboxing, maybe just straight boxing. And those all kind of complement one another, and they give you a very unique game. But for me, it's like I'll go extended periods of time of doing just grappling, and then I'll go extended periods of time of doing mainly striking. So it's like, which one am I trying to progress in right now? Let me bring the other one down to baseline so I at least don't atrophy, so then I can focus more time on this. But I think when it comes to like what can everyone train, the real benefit, in my opinion, of martial arts is one, body control, but two, fighting, right? Something that we've been doing for our entire existence, but we have no semblance of now. And that's why all men are so weak and slimy, is because we don't go out and like fight each other. Like I know guys that have literally never gotten any form of confrontation, friendly or not friendly, with friend or foe. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it has an impact on your psyche. Your brain doesn't know whether or not that guy trying to choke you out is doing it for fun or because he's actually trying to kill you. So it's going to make the adaptations required to make you more, like, have a better chance of survival. And jujitsu and grappling enables you to do that and simulate that fighting experience with less risk of TBIs. Like I've gotten quite a few concussions from sparring and striking. Like I've gotten very few head injuries from going out and going 100% in jujitsu consistently. So that makes the most sense for someone who values their brain. I still think striking is important. I'm really getting back into Muay Thai right now. I love that art. And for
Mm-hmm.
my physiology, like I have really, really good kicks. So it makes sense for me to like create a form of fighting that allows me to utilize those kicks.
Let's go, dude. Yeah, I'm very much one of those people who've like never really got into too many scraps. And like even I know you just you met Vic the other day.
Vic Von Doom,
Vance's friend.
baby.
Yeah, great dude. But when I was hanging out with Vance, like me and him were just doing some grappling for fun. And um like I feel like I connected to a part of myself that that I loved. It was just like a like a feeling of me at my purest, most like animalistic sense, and not in a bad way, but in a controlled way. It was almost like a release of that. Um, and yeah, so like that, it's just something that I think that I need to reconnect to, and I think. Like you were saying before, doing all those different types of martial arts and messing around with all of them is kind of the way to um, get that more holistic, the body, like get your body right in the sense of you kind of train everything and that creates a very unique physique. And then on top of that, the mental and physical enjoyment and mastery that comes with that is fascinating.
If you don't get that animalistic nature out in healthy ways, it's going to manifest itself in unhealthy ways. That's
Yeah.
why so many martial artists, like you're talking about Vic and we're talking about Vance, like those are the nicest guys you'll ever meet. They're both professional fighters. Vic's undefeated D1 wrestler. And they're like the nicest, most mild tempered guys you'd ever meet because they are getting those primal urges out in a healthy manner. And
Mm-hmm.
those guys can beat the brakes off of anybody, right? I love going out with those guys because you feel so safe.
There's
But
no
yeah,
doubt
and
about that.
the camaraderie of fighting is incredible. Like we underplay how important physical touch is to just being a functioning human. Not even in a romantic fashion. It's like shaking someone's hand. COVID really destroyed our ability to just be in physical contact with other people. And
Mm-hmm.
martial arts is oftentimes the only time that you're actually touching someone else physically in a non-romantic manner. And that's really important, you know? You got to release oxytocin somehow.
No doubt about that, dude. And how has your diet been evolving? It's something I've seen you post a little bit about adding in more vegetables and fruits, high antioxidant foods. How
Yeah.
has your diet kind of evolved over the years?
Great question. So my diet's changed so much, but the fundamentals have always stayed the same. I don't eat things that my body didn't evolve to eat, right? Like looking back, I really keep that threshold. The ideal threshold should be 50,000 years, right? Because that's when our last true digestive adaptations may have occurred. But I keep that threshold at 10,000 years. So I'm always eating clean, and I just love eating clean. We go out to eat, and I don't eat food. Like I don't eat when I go out unless I'm going somewhere where I can control the variables. So I go to a
Really?
lot of Korean barbecue and hot pot because I know every single variable because I control it, right? I'm cooking the food. But
That's
when it
awesome.
comes to eating, I've been really conscientious about the potential pro aging effects of the primal diet, right? And I see all these guys eating ribeye steaks that are just like char seared with honey on top and a side of vitamin C and like oranges and bananas. And then you look at them, they look great physically, but they all look kind of aged, right? And I think that I aged a lot the last year from living on a beach, smoking organic tobacco, and surfing midday every single day while eating three charred steaks a day. So I switched up my diet. I started incorporating a lot more herbs and vegetables and eating a lot more raw meat. And I'm doing that to see if I can kind of address the advanced glycation end products that seem to occur when you're having a lot of cooked meat, especially when you're consuming it with fruit. Those things that contribute to oxidative stress and aging and really are hard to detox in general. One of the best things you can do is cook with herbs, cook with other vegetables, and consume meat with vegetables. And it's something that has become memed out. It's like, oh, like these have anti-nutrients in them. And that's kind of, there's merit to that. But they make such a strong distinction where it's like, first of all, anti-nutrients oftentimes have therapeutic benefit. Second of all, these foods have been eaten in conjunction for ages because there's a synergy here. And third of all, it's not that like clear cut of a distinction. People that eat a bunch of fruits are like, I won't eat vegetables because they have oxalates in them. But then they go and they eat 3 kiwis that have more oxalates than radishes. And it's orthorexia, it's fanaticism. It's a lot easier to not think for yourself and kind of just go with the flow. You want to talk about cults? That's why people are drawn to cults because it's really hard to come up with your own perspective and worldview when you can just take the advice of someone else who's charismatic and says stuff like they mean it.
Dude, it's fascinating, and it's a conversation in this health space that you don't hear too much, at least in our side of things, of the downsides of taking this like animal based type of approach, or this thing that has become very popularized on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok. And um, there's definitely a fascinating thing when you look at like a guy like, or I won't go into specifics, but some of these biohackers and how old they look. it's
Right?
yeah, it's a super interesting conversation.
It is. And I look at that, right? Because that's something you really want to look at. It's like, I'm going down this path. This is someone who has gone down this path before me. Do I want to be like them? And every
Mhm.
biohacker that I know, I look at them and I'm like, something's up. Like, I don't really want to do what you're doing. Paul Saladino is the only one where it's like, I love
Mhm.
Paul. But
Yeah,
also looking at Paul, he's getting a lot of flack now because it does look like he's aged pretty rapidly.
yeah. Do you think
From
that's just sun
a
exposure?
skin, sorry?
Do you think that's a lot just from sun exposure though?
I mean, that's one factor, right? But that's sun exposure compounded with not eating any vegetables, having a very low polyphenol diet. I guess he does eat a lot of berries, but also just having a lot of cooked meat.
Hmm.
So, I mean, do I think that's why he is the way that he is? No. But I love Paul Saladino because his lifestyle is on brand. His
Hmm.
lifestyle is on brand. He's actually doing things and he's changing his mind as he goes along. But you also got to ask yourself, what do I perform best with? Based on my knowledge, what do I think is most sensible? It's just we're so impressionable. We're such impressionable people that we just see what other people are doing. We're like, I'd rather just do that. I'd rather just
Hmm.
follow someone that I trust. I'm too question. I question everything a little bit too much to do that. So
Yeah.
I'd rather go and experiment on myself and see what happens.
Dude, I'm so excited for you to get that metabolomics test
Yeah,
because
me too. I want to see what my labs look like. I haven't done labs in a minute.
that test itself too is fascinating because it has these different categories when it comes to need for antioxidants in your diet, needs for reduced toxin exposure, um, measures all these different type of amino acids, and it's a very and digestive stuff. It's a very interesting test to um, see what's going on under the hood, and like to your point, it's like if you feel great and your labs are on point, but you aren't doing like an animal based diet or you're doing something contrary to what everyone on Twitter is telling you to do, but you're kind of on point, does it matter? Like it doesn't seem to me that it would matter too much. And that's the coolest thing I think about this experimental things that you're doing is you get to see that firsthand. It's like I'm going through all these different N of one experiments to just see what's going to be the best thing for me, and I'm sharing those results.
Yeah. It's really about playing the long game too. Like my objective is to figure myself out. In the short term, that's going to be a lot more work, right? Coming up with your own worldview and your own perspective on things, it's a lot of work. That's why people think it's so much easier just to follow 10 commandments or whatever. It's just like, this
Mm-hmm.
is how it is. So in the short term, yeah, that's really beneficial to follow someone else's structure. But, I'm playing the long game. I've always played the long game. My goal is to be like as independent of a thinker as possible and formulate my own worldview and my own perspective on what this life is. So, with that, I'm playing an infinite game, which is incredible because I'll never
Mm-hmm.
get bored. I'll never lose purpose. I'll never lose focus. And at the end of the day, I'm going to be rewarded heavily for it. I do believe that I've already been rewarded heavily for eating shit in the beginning and really
Mm-hmm.
figuring my own stuff out. And that came out of necessity, right? Because me following other people's movements, me following other people's modalities never worked for me. There was always something missing. Most people just accept that. I didn't, you know?
Mm-hmm. Is this part of the reason why you've been disenchanted with the health space recently? Is like you're seeing a lot of these guys, these biohacker types, and you're looking at them and you're just like, I don't want to be like you guys. Is that part of what's led to this realization for you?
that's that's why I stopped being like going down the health influencer route
Mm-hmm.
entirely. Because I was getting a lot of really good opportunities. Like I was really growing really quickly as being like a health influencer. It was like first and foremost, I don't have the full picture, and like I believe that anyone who wants to get to the top level in that space, like they have to focus in on one thing. Like that's going to
Mm.
really move the needle forward for them, right? It's
And
Overton's window.
claim to
They
have the
speak
answers.
yeah, it's like Liver King, right? Or like Liver King or
Yep.
anybody. They go all in on one thing, and that's their ticket to fame. But my personal realization as I'm going through this life and I'm trying to figure out how to be my best self, I came to the conclusion that yeah, health is important, physical health is important, but that's the base level of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like once you hit that, then you need to start focusing on the more abstract and the life fundamentals. And so many guys in the health space, they overlook that. And where does it end them up? They end up being 40 years old, looking like you're the average Joe, spending most of their time on the internet arguing with anonymous people. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
that's not the life that I want to live. That's not aspirational to me. So that's why I kind of removed myself from that. When it came to just like where the health space is in general, especially in our world, like when I first started, nobody was kind of talking about things in the way that me and some of my other contemporaries were talking about it. And now there's just this massive influx of cookie cutters talking about all this stuff. And I'm like, I don't really want to play this game. Like I'm not getting any value from this either.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I was just kind of over it, for lack of a better term. Like there's other things I want to focus on. I'm sure I'm going to come back full swing. Like there's nothing that keeps me up at night more than being obsessed about these health topics. And I know
Mm-hmm.
that's why it's something that's really important to me because I stay up late researching and reading and coming to conclusions. And there's nothing else that has me do that like health. And I feel like
Mm.
I've really been able to understand a lot of these core concepts that have enabled me to go from being in horrible health and really being quite messed up to being quite like a well-functioning human.
And to reiterate, for the people who aren't like the most familiar with you or your journey, what was that 80-20 there for you of the biggest movers that got you from feeling like shit to being where you're
Yeah,
at today?
it really was as simple as living an evolutionarily accurate lifestyle, as cliche as that sounds, right? I'm a hyperactive person, so being hyperactive in my day to day, doing a lot of stuff, being out in nature as much as possible, avoiding modern environmental toxins. That's probably the most important thing. Removing those environmental toxins, removing the things that are causing an evolutionary mismatch where our genes no longer are encoded for our environment, right? That was the biggest factor, right? It's just about living a natural lifestyle. And that's something that I'll preach until the end of the day. That is something that is still the number one needle mover in my life and something that I always come back to and has not failed me yet. But that is one part of the larger piece of living a good life. That's the foundation. You just got to
Mm.
do that.
Where's your head been at with dairy lately?
Well, I like dairy. I mean, especially colostrum. But I like dairy as a concept, and I like dairy as like if I could consume dairy, I would be having so much dairy because it's just so anabolic, right? But the issue is, for some reason or another, whenever I consume anything that spikes IGF-1, insulin like growth factor 1, it causes acne, right? I get skin issues. And
Me
there's
as
a number
well.
of factors here. I think dairy in and of itself does cause some inflammatory, cytokines, some inflammatory cytokine release. Fermented dairy doesn't seem to have that same problem. But the fact that dairy has exogenous IGF-1 and it also stimulates IGF-1 release from your kidney, I'm a hyper responder to that. So I started consuming dairy and I become an absolute unit. It's crazy how strong and how big I get. But it also increases growth factors in my sebocytes, which are the cells that create sebum, which is skin oil.
Mhm.
And when that happens for me, I oftentimes get acne.
Yeah.
I've been like, I always try to reincorporate it, but if I do it long enough, or if I do it too much, or if there's other inflammatory factors in my life, I'll oftentimes get acne when I do it. So, for me, it's just like the pros or the cons, unfortunately, outweigh the pros. That's something that I've been digging so deep on because, man, if I could consume dairy, it'd be awesome.
It's funny that that's your answer because I feel very similarly for myself. It's like I just I get acne, and it's just a thing that sadly I have to be mindful of just because of I don't want to be breaking out all the time.
Yeah, it's an evolutionary mismatch.
Yeah.
IGF-1's growth factor. It's increasing sebum production in your sebocytes because that's your protective barrier of your skin. So having well-oiled skin is beneficial. It protects you from the elements. But we live in an environment where our microbiome is obviously, nobody has a perfect microbiome. So those acne-producing bacteria are a lot more abundant and rampant, and we have a lot more opportunity for those acne bacteria to kind of populate and fester in those comedones and in those like those pores, those sebocytes.
No doubt about it, dude. So when it comes to supplements you've been into lately, are there any ones? I know you're always kind of doing some deep dives and experimenting and tinkering with different things. Which ones have been stayed consistent for you, and which ones have you been messing around with recently?
Great question. So I removed all supplements for a while and I slowly started reincorporating them because that's how you're supposed to do it. A
Mm.
lot of people go, they get a bunch of supplements and they spam them all at the same time. They have no idea what's causing what. And your body always wants to maintain homeostasis. So if you're inducing like super physiological amounts of anything, there's always an opportunity for things to go RE. And if you're not really honing your attention on those compounds and seeing how they affect you, and also cross referencing that with anecdotes and research, you could be screwing yourself and not even know. Now, some of the compounds that I always come back to and I've reincorporated are some of the amino acids, particularly glycine and taurine. I always come back to glycine and taurine. They're incredible. I think I look at those as hedges against our, inherently toxic lifestyle.
Mm.
Taurine, it's an incredible testicular antioxidant. It's really good at helping your muscles kind of uptake some of that blood or sugar in your blood and really cap off those glycogen stores. I do find it to be a cognitive enhancer. I do find it to be pro GABA, so it puts me in a good mood, and I find it to be incredible for performance. Glycine, I mean, I've been looking at glycine actually because it's quite androgenic, right? It increases
Really?
luteinizing hormone. It increases or enhances 5-alpha reductase activity. Some correlation between glycine and growth hormone via GABA. So I come back to those a lot. Those are things that we would otherwise be getting in our diets, but we may not be getting as much anymore. I always come back to those. I always come back to collagen, some of those other amino acids like proline and hydroxyproline that you can get from collagen. Some things that I also come back to for me, personally are B vitamins. I just find that, because I'm a poor methylator, methylated B vitamins do seem to do me well. Ginkgo biloba is still my favorite nootropic. The risk
Mm.
profile is ridiculously low. The benefits that it has with its acetylcholine activity, its acetylcholinesterase inhibition, and most importantly, cerebral blood flow has been serious. I've recently reincorporated some functional mushrooms. I've been staying away from functional mushrooms because of their potential anti-androgenic effects. But I was looking and it's like, listen, I've been really focusing on being pro-androgen, and my androgens are to the point where it's possible that I have potentially too much of them. So
Yeah.
I don't think that me utilizing these very powerful medicinal compounds strategically are that dangerous. So actually, I've been trying things like reishi, which is something that I'd always stay away from because of its potential 5-alpha reductase inhibition. Other than that, a lot of tea. I've been getting back into Japanese tea. That is a supplement. It's an incredible art and kind of culture. And then Bouteille superba and Cistanche tuberosa.
Mm.
Those are two compounds that I've really been enjoying and I've really dug into and found merit in, and think that they're beneficial for me as well as beneficial for a lot of men.
I need to get more tea in my life, dude. Every time I have tea consistently, it's such an enjoyable addition to life. And honestly, I think it's a weight cut enhancer just because like there's something to be said about like the hot beverage, a little bit of flavor, filling you up a bit and like kind of taking away that desire to eat something.
Yeah,
But
EGCG is a thermogenic as well. So like
oh,
EGCG
interesting.
is in a lot of weight loss compounds. You have that. You have
Wait.
the thermogenic effect of caffeine and
Mm,
the appetite suppressing effect of caffeine, and you have the fact that you're consuming liquids, right, that are going to be filling up your stomach and hot liquids. So
mm-hmm,
wonderful, splendid. Just make sure you're getting tea from Japan. Chinese
mm-hmm.
tea is horribly, horribly, horribly contaminated with pesticides and heavy metals.
Where do you like to get that tea from? Is that something you get in person, or you have a spot online?
No, I get it straight from Japan
Oh,
because you want Japanese companies because they're very stringent with
mm,
their compliance. So even if you're getting a Chinese or a Thai tea, you want to get it from a Japanese distributor. I just picked up a big order from Osha and Co. Not affiliated or anything. It's just like this small Japanese company that they got good tea.
I'm writing that down right now. I need to get some tea. How's it been being stateside? I know you were in Mexico for quite a while, living a very lifestyle very connected to nature, and then you come back to the States, and even though you are by the water and stuff now, it's obviously just a very different lifestyle. What's it been like for you just being back in the USA?
It's good. Cycle everything. I love being an American. I'm very proud of my American culture. I come from my mom's side. Grandpa immigrated from Iran, and I think he instilled why it's so important to like really assimilate with wherever you're living. And he was very proud to live in America. Very grateful for it. I mean, do I like the way that America's going? No. This is probably one of the last places I want to be if the world's going to end. And I think that just the amount of turmoil here is kind of obnoxious. Um, but I think the development and the culture in America doesn't scratch my itch. So it's good. Cycle everything. This is a good lifestyle cycle. But this is pushing me further to what I think my real objective and ideal environment is, which is like a small town in the middle of
Mm-hmm.
nature. And that's how I lived for the last year and a half, 2 years, and that's how I want to continue to live. It's what do they say? Distance makes the heart grow fonder. I
Mm-hmm.
just know that this isn't kind of the environment that I want to live in, and that's
Sure.
okay. That's completely okay. I've created a life where I can live wherever I want, whenever I want, and I want to take advantage of that. And that's going to be my goal for all of 2025.
That goal being finding that place.
Just go and live in like a small village in the Japanese countryside, or maybe go back to
Ooh.
Southeast Asia, stuff like that. So
Oh, that's awesome. So that's what you're kind of thinking next steps, because I know, did you study abroad in Japan?
in Thailand.
In
So I spent
Thailand.
a lot of time in Southeast Asia. Went
Got
to
you.
school out there, and spent a lot of time in these small villages and these small towns, and it was just such a rich culture that you don't get in the globalized world, and it made me feel good, for
Mm,
lack of a better term. It opened something in me. It awoken that inner child, and it's really important to hone into that. And I just feel so great when I'm assimilating with the culture and I'm learning their language, I'm learning their culture. I completely embrace their cuisine, and I like that. And unfortunately, in the globalized world, we no longer have those small isolated cultures. And as this older generation dies off, unfortunately, a lot of those cultures are going to die off with it. So I want to go and experience
yeah.
that before it's gone.
Damn. Yeah, that makes me want to do the same. And it's like one of the biggest things I think you learn from those experiences. And the more you do it, the more you realize, like, you know, to like you have to leave what you know to find out what you know. In so many ways, it's like when you're so instilled with certain ways of living, and you go flip that on his head and live somewhere completely contrary to that, you very much realize like what aspects of your own life you very much enjoy and which ones you don't enjoy as much.
Yeah, 100%. It's what I always talk about with like mimetic desires, and the fact that who you think you are is oftentimes just a culmination of what your environment expects of you. Like when I was in college, I probably said this in the last podcast, I watched a lot of football. I watched football every Sunday, 4 hours a day. The second I graduated college, I never watched another football game again, not even the Super Bowl. So I thought that college was part of me and part of my life, but in reality, it was just me compensating for those around me.
That's
And
so
you don't
funny.
realize that until you go to a different place. And once you do that, you unlock new versions of yourself, but then you also become attuned to those things that stay consistent throughout all of those different contexts and environments. And those are the things that are most likely the core version of you. And that's incredible. And some people never realize that.
No doubt about it. No, anything we haven't talked about today that you think would be fun to cover or just fundamental to this conversation today?
It's a good question. No, we covered a lot. We covered a lot. I think, the thing that I always hone in on, and, it comes in waves, but it's like the pursuit of competency. The pursuit of
Mm,
competency will never do you wrong. So many people ask me, like, I don't know what to do with my life. What should I be doing? Like, where do I go? I'm like, no one ever knows what to do with their life, but the one thing that will never hurt you is to become more competent, right? To become more
mm,
capable of providing value, to become a more functional and effective human being. So then once those opportunities arise, you're able to take full advantage of them because you're so competent.
mm. How do you think you should find what to try to get competent in?
Meta skills, right? It's like,
Mm,
I don't know what I want to do. What are the things that no matter what I do will apply to me? And that's what I did in college. That's what everyone should do. Maybe it's like, I don't know what I want to do entirely, but there's this bundle of things that I want to do. What are the things that I can focus on now that will benefit me in every single one of those areas?
I, dude, that's it's such a great answer, because it's like, I think I did this podcast. I started this podcast as a junior in college, and now I'm building the business, and there's so many things that I've learned through the pursuit of the podcast and trying to become competent in the podcast that has made me so much better at doing the business thing. And yeah, it's I think that the meta skills are so important there. It's a great reminder to just keep honing in on those big needle movers.
Yeah. We think that all pursuits in our life are disparate, right? Like that
Hmm.
one skill only applies to one pursuit. But in reality, it's all the same thing. It's
No
all
doubt.
the same thing. The only thing that's changing is the offer or the model or whatever that is. So you realize that and you want to go through life honing in on that. So many people are in jobs right now that they hate. And because they hate it, they're not taking advantage of the learning opportunities that will apply to them down the road. So everyone that's always like, oh, I'm in a job I hate, like, how do I get out of this and start living more independent lifestyle? It's like, well, there's opportunities for you to get better at things right now that you can do well getting paid to do so. So why aren't you honing in on that? And why aren't you going in every day looking at areas that you can improve on that are going to serve you once you leave? Now, if you truly do hit that ceiling where you are no longer growing at all, that's when it makes sense to leave. But I'm sure that right now there's 30 things that if you just focused on improving, you would become an incredibly more effective person 3 months from now, 5 months from now.
It's so true, dude. And um, I have a very selfish question here to end things, which is, do you have any advice for me, both in um, now having been on this podcast 3 times, being familiar with the things I post on Twitter, the business side of things that I'm doing? Is there anything, any advice that you would give me?
Yeah, train martial arts. Maybe go move to a beach. I'm not even joking. I think that you'd benefit heavily from training martial arts.
Hell yeah, let's go.
Training
I'm
martial
excited.
arts, kind of exploring your own ideas more too, I think would be beneficial for you. But what we realize is like you think that your problems are unique to yourself. I think my problems are unique to myself. But once you spend time studying, most importantly, historical figures and people that were real needle movers in history, they're dealing with the same problems that we are, right? Like not feeling good enough, poor
Hmm.
sense of self worth, feeling like everything's going wrong in their life. They're all the same problems. It doesn't matter who you are, it's all the same problems. And all those problems oftentimes come about from the solutions come about from more self discovery and more inflection. So that's why I do think that people will benefit more from, I guess, pursuit of self actualization. But I think for you specifically, and people don't like when they get advice because they feel like they already know it and they wanted to hear something they didn't know. But spend more time thinking about your unique worldview, coming up with your own philosophy for life and thinking about it deeply. And then obviously becoming more competent and capable in every area.
Mr. No Rhyme, appreciate you, bro. Thanks
Mr.
for making
Ryan,
time for
thank
this.
you.